Everybody, wanted to take some time here to be able to share some good things about fear and faith, the difference between fear and faith, and the difference between fear and wisdom. So I pray that as you watch this or as you listen to it, maybe while you're working, driving, or doing something, as you're tuning in, make sure you pay attention to whatever you're doing visually. But I'm praying that what I'm going to share here today will be fruitful in the times that we're living in, because I know it applies. One of the things that was very helpful to me in my emotional, mental health journey and my relational health, heart health, all that kind of stuff was really being able to differentiate between what's fear, what's of the enemy, and what's of God. Because for me, uh, hold on just a second, my earpiece fell out. For me, what happened is I would just tune into whatever was the loudest voice, right? Hold on just a second. My earpiece literally fell right off in the middle of this broadcast. So I'm just going to fix it and adjust it. Just helps me to hear what you're hearing so I can tune into that. There we go. So early on in my journey, it was very, very helpful for me to differentiate between my thoughts, because I would just tune into whatever was the loudest thought, right? And that's often what we do. We tune into the emotion or the thought that kind of has our attention. The problem is that fear is often the loudest voice. Panic is often the loudest voice. So we live in a culture where we're competing for attention in our voices. And who's going to have the dominant narrative? And isn't that where spiritual warfare is fought? When people talk about spiritual warfare, fighting the good fight, fighting spiritual warfare battles, what are we really talking about? We're talking about what thoughts are going to have the dominant influence in people's lives. Because the things that we think become the things we feel, because every thought has a corresponding emotion connected and attached to it. So that emotion then affects you. People say, well, I'm not influenced by my emotions. That you're self-unaware. You don't have self-awareness. The majority of what you do is actually tied to emotions. You move towards what you like. You often move away from what you don't like. You move away from pain. You move towards comfort. You like to move towards pleasure. You like to move away towards discomfort, right? And so oftentimes where the growth is in pressing out of our normal areas where we kind of just lean into ditches of certain thinking, and we just stay with what's comfortable. And I realized that God's number one concern is not my comfort. So what helped me the most in walking through healing and transformation regarding mental health battles, anxiety, OCD stuff, wherever you're at. And you say, well, I don't have any mental health battles. Everybody's got mental health things they're working through. Just because you haven't been diagnosed formally with something, it doesn't mean anything. We all have areas that we need to grow in. But what helped me is to begin to really align my vision in my thoughts to be able to discern. I needed to discern what's coming through the wavelength. And I would just tend to flow with whatever was the strongest, whatever had the strongest impulse. And so then I'd find myself in obsessive thinking, worry, just not being able to get out of the worry, or being really struck by an overwhelming sense of anxiety. And not realizing, wait a second, this thought system I'm under is not of God. I'm under a battle right now, and I need to learn how to break free. And it's more than just an instant prayer, although instant prayers can help. It's more about a process and a journey of really gaining clarity. I think one of the great products or manifestations of maturity, growth, is that you have a grid in your thinking of how to align and how to separate out what thoughts are of God and what are not of God. And that takes practice. It takes getting feedback from people, because a lot of Christians can just say, well, this is my thought, and God said this, and God said that. And it's like, wait a second, you created an ironclad fortress around your thinking. When I'm doing a coaching session with somebody, I can often immediately detect when they're not teachable, because they start pumping into their story. God told me this, and God told me that, and here's what God said, and here's what God did, and here's God. And it's like, wait a second. you're creating no room here for growth of like, hey, maybe I've been listening to fear and I attributed it as God. Looking back, even in some of my pastoral decisions, I said, God, I feel God leading me to do such and such. And now I'm looking back, I'm like, that was 100% driven by fear. Now it's okay. And so I think what I'd like to talk about is the difference between fear and faith, but then also the difference between fear and wisdom. And here's the first truth that we need to understand. We often defend our fears. So, for example, if you tell somebody, hey, you need to make this very wise decision that you think is a wise decision, and somebody goes, then what you say is you say, well, you don't care, right? And so on another angle, if you have certain fears that cause you to live a certain way, that say, well, I have to do this every single day because, and somebody says, well, have you ever thought that you may be motivated by fear? This isn't fear. This is, right? How often do you hear that? When you hear that statement, this isn't fear. This is, we become defensive. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that you're in fear or not. It takes discernment. But what I'm going to help you talk through today is how to enhance your discernment. But we have to be willing to have flexibility in that we're learning to hear from God, and we need to be open about areas and layers of fear that we have in our lives. And people will say to me, I don't have any fear. I have zero fear. You're self-unaware. It's a clear sign of self-unawareness. Because you're calm right now in your current state doesn't mean you have zero fears. Because as soon as something hits a certain area of your life that brings out those vulnerabilities, fear is going to want to manifest, and you'll have a struggle on your hands. We are spirit beings, right? We are spirit. We have a soul. We live in a body. We have hearts that experience life, and there is a humanity of experiencing emotional aspects of journey, experience, relationships. So we have to give room for process and not just see things so harshly where we're just so defensive and no, I'm hearing from God. This is what God said. And it's like, why don't you just take a step back and allow God to move in your heart and be teachable. So let's talk about fear and faith, because right, we want to move out of the goal is moving out of fear and moving into faith, hope, and love. That's one dimension that is critically important, because everything in faith, hope, and love is what fear opposes. Perfect love casts out fear. The hope that we have is steadfast, and we don't have to be afraid because the love of God has been shed abroad in our hearts, right? Fear wants to oppose your hope, to instead of hope being a strong anchor, fear being something that you get tossed by every wind and wave. Then there's faith. There's a difference between faith and fear. I'll get to in a second. Paul also said, God's not giving you the spirit of fear. So it shows fear is a spiritual assault that will come against you. And he says, he's not giving you that, but power, love, and a sound mind or self-control. So you see there are three components of what God is working. So if we want to first outline what God is doing, everything he does is built on faith, hope, and love. And when it comes to the arena of fear, God is wanting to build love, which is in the faith, hope, and love category. He wants to have power, because power creates boldness, courage in the face of fear, and a sound mind. Now, when I have been under anxiety, or I've been under worry, or obsessive thinking, or panic attacks, or I've been in mood swings, or just difficulty in maintaining my peace, the last thing I feel I have is a sound mind. And we need a sound mind in our lives more than ever before. So when the storms hit, we're gauged into faith, hope, and love. God, what are you doing? What are you saying? What are you saying for us? And it's usually not complicated. It's usually very simple. Love your neighbor as yourself, receive love, remain steadfast, keep your eyes up, one step, one foot in front of the other, hold the fort. When you've done all to stand, right? It's not often these like complicated things. It's usually very simple. But what's the difference between faith and fear? Now, the similarities, let's first talk about those. They're both unseen. You can't see faith, but you see the manifestation of faith in that we take action. It's the substance of things hoped for. What your hope is built on, your faith will activate out of it. Fear is also unseen. You can't see it, but you see the manifestation of it over time in your life and in other people's lives, right? We can often see where other people are operating in fear. We can often be blind to where we personally are under fear's influence, right? So they both are unseen. They both speak about the future. So right now in our current global situations, there is a narrative of fear and there's a narrative of faith. Now, fear isn't just saying, panic, you're going to die, the world's coming to an end. That's part of it, but it has subtle things it brings in. Oh, what about this? What's going to happen if this? You need to have all these scenarios. What if this worst thing happens? What if that thing? It creates these different, just be aware of it. Let's not be defensive about every thought we have, but just be more aware. Hey, I might be listening to fear on a greater level, right? So they both create a perspective about the future. Faith looks ahead and sees God in it and what God is doing and going to do. And faith, if your faith is developing, you can take your history in God, which is your testimony, and what God has done, he will continue to do in your present, and you can be sure that he will do it in your future. So you have a sense of what God is doing in the future, but your focus is in the here and now, right? Faith moves you forward, but your focus is what's right in front of you, being present in the moment. Fear takes you out of being present in the moment and has you constantly projecting, and then you become a self-protecting machine. And so I even to this day, I'm letting God work on these areas of my heart that it's like fear conditioned me to just constantly put out these things of like every area that I need to make sure I'm protected from. And that self-protection will create a prison and will just really keep you from walking in freedom. And often the solution to that is being present in the moment. For now, faith is knowing the work of God, but staying present in the moment. And so it takes, no matter what I say here today, it takes discernment. But I'm praying what I'm sharing with you here today will help sharpen your discernment so that you can grow in the ways of what thoughts are motivating me. Your spiritual warfare assignment is taking thoughts captive of what are the dominant thoughts that motivate you throughout the day and allowing God to teach you to understand them, understand what influencing them, and learning to bring in the obedience to Christ. What does that mean? That means that bringing the ways of how Christ thinks, which is available to you. It's available to you right now, but we learn in relationship. Okay. So some differences between faith and fear. I talked about how fear keeps you out of the moment. Faith will know the moment, the future is secure and it keeps you present. Faith is working in leading. We are led by the Holy Spirit. And many of you in your walk, you know those moments where you're led to make that phone call and somebody's like, man, this is just the right timing, or you're led to financially give to somebody or to donate something or to give of your time or give of something, or you feel led to pray over something and the timing of that was remarkable, or you feel we know those leadings. If I sit down with you, you know the leadings, but fear is under pressure. Fear creates a pressure. And here's something that we have to let go of in order to overcome the fear factor is the yoke of pressure. We live under stress, we live under pressure, and that's a sign of fear. I'm stressed. Stress is a word that expresses being under the influence of the fear factor. So one of the first steps to move more into faith is letting go of the pressure, being still, knowing he is God, and taking off the yoke of pressure. There is no pressure in heaven right now. So therefore, I don't need to live under the yoke of pressure. So that's why slowing down, getting still is critical on a daily basis, because you use those moments as a time to cast your cares on him. Because as soon as you cast them, you'll take them back. As soon as you cast them, you'll take them back. As soon as you let them go, you take them back. You do that all the time. right? You're like, God, I give it over to you. And you feel the refreshment of letting it go. And then you're like, yeah, but you should probably still think about that, because all the fear comes back in again. We have to let it go. So we're learning to just let those things go. Fear, uh, walking in faith rather, will always lead you into living in what the Bible calls divine rest. Divine rest means that you're active. It's not sleepy. It's not passive. Divine rest is walking in the yielded work of God, that he's empowering you. You're receiving that. And with energy, you're living a refreshed life where you're stepping out and there's a flow that's coming through, a confidence in him flowing through you, being moved by the Spirit, being led by the Spirit, being a manifestation of the fruit of the Spirit, right? But there's two ditches we can fall into that take us out of rest, and fear will do that. One of them is striving, the other one is passivity. And when we get out of faith, fear comes in to take us out of rest, because rest is not passive. Many people say, I'm just resting in faith. And it's like, nah, you're not taking action. Or they're saying, I'm waiting on the Lord. And you're really just not taking action. You're in fear. You're afraid to make a mistake. And you're waiting for God to like echo something and walk into your room and give you the perfect word, and then you'll take action, right? I've seen people sit for decades under that kind of mindset. Now, this takes discernment. There's no formula, because two people could say, I'm waiting on the Lord. One of them is dead on to what they need to do for their assignment. The other one is driven by fear. The fear that's moved them into being passive. Many men are passive in their homes. They don't take action because of fear. What fear? Fear of failure. If I take initiative and I mess up, if I pray with my wife and I don't say it right, or if I try to talk about this issue and I don't know what to say, so they live passive and they take the passive route, and the enemy's got them with the sniper gun because they haven't taken the step of faith that they could have. On the other hand, when we get out of rest, which is where faith will lead us into, Hebrews 4 talks about entering into the rest of God. There is a rest today for the people of God. And one area of ditch is passivity. The other area is striving, where you just, out of fear, you push, you go, and you burn fuel. It's the modern hustle we talk about, right? And many of you that praise hustle, you're actually out of rest. You're not in faith. I'll just take a sip of coffee while you think about that one. We don't think about things that way often. We just kind of, I work hard. It's not the work hard. What's motivating? What's the driving force that is behind your hard work? So the Bible says we got to cease from our works, move into a place where, and so people say, how do I know that? How do I do that? You've got to develop a posture of receiving the rest of God, letting go of fears, letting go of the pressure, entering into his rest. I'm going to be active today, awake, sober, alert to what's going on, receiving your energy, flowing in that. You're with me. I don't need to be afraid. So when stuff happens, I'm ready to engage it. I'm not going to take the passive route, but at the same time, the pressure's not on me. It's on God. He's got this. He knows what's going on. He knows what's happening. There's a lot of overworking, striving, pressure-filled, very driven people, type A or whatever, that you need to let go of the yoke of all that stuff, because here's what will happen. If you live in 24/7 hustle world and you don't learn to live in the rest of God, I'm not talking about that hard work is bad, because we need to be diligent and be faithful to consistent hard work. It's part of life. I'm talking about the spirit behind what's influencing that, and you need to be honest about it. If you live under that and continue to live under that, here's the trap. The trap is you got your money, you got whatever you got by 100% your hard work. So when tough times happen, you've got to amp it up even more. The thing is when during tough times, you often need to do the absolute opposite of what you feel or feel pressured to do. You actually often need to slow down when you're many times taught that you need to speed up. So we're already in some good stuff with the difference between faith and fear, right? Faith faces things. Fear is always avoiding things. Now, fear will do a fight or flight mechanism in you. So fight is I gotta do this, but I'm doing it in stress. Right? Flight is I gotta get out of here. I gotta avoid. So it's either gear up or avoid, gear up or withdraw. What's your tendency? What does fear make you do? Does it make you shut down and withdraw? Or does it make you get amped up and then you're stressed out trying to control things all day, right? Trying to control things, trying to control things. Faith faces things, but with God. Faith, the life of faith is refreshing. The life of fear is always stress. So when I see my stress levels high, I realize fear has had an influence and I need to learn to rest in the lifestyle of faith in my confidence. People say, yeah, we need to trust God more. Sometimes trust can be a cliche. Trust God, trust God, trust God, trust God. And I help people in understanding what really fuels trust. It's confidence. I'm learning to develop my confidence in God, in his love for me. I'm confident that he loves me. So therefore, I have a good hope. I have a future that's ahead that I can learn and rely on. John said in his writings, we know and we rely on the love that God has for us. So faith is the substance of hope, things hoped for. What is hope? It's how you spiritually see. So right now in the current global crisis that's going on in this as of this recording, as this live broadcast, what is the narrative? It's based on the hope of how you see things, how you really see things. And fear is the substance of things not hoped for. It's a list of all the things you hope will never happen. It creates a dread narrative. So you're focused on what you hope will never happen. You focus your attention on it. So then you gear up all your resources around that to either gear up or to avoid. And a lifestyle of that is deadly. Faith is always empowering. No matter what God does, he's always empowering us. He's always strengthening us. No matter what, he's causing us to move towards the battle. We grow up in it. We become empowered. He's adding power to your life, increasing power. Fear is always disempowering. It's always going to point you to defeat. I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do. And in this time, many people are being, quarantined or you're at a place where you're not at your job, you're not able to go to work. There's a lot of limitations, a lot of stuff that's out of your control. It's a good time to realize a whole lot is out of your control. But what we can be empowered in is our state of mind, our attitude. When I realize that my attitude and the compass where I'm setting my direction, that's my choice. Now, I may be struggling, but I have a decision on where to set my compass. I may not be in control of when I wake up in the morning, what thoughts come my way, but I can take my place of decision over where my compass is pointing, where I turn my rudder. You can't control every storm that comes your way or unexpected obstacles. All that's out of your control. The one thing you have is your ability to decide to set your rudder. And I find that as I move into faith and keep building it, it helps me to deal with my hope. What is the future I'm meditating on? What is the future I believe on? And faith always brings an optimism and a hope. Fear is always going to lead to negative discouragement and even depression, right? So I hope this helps you to get a sense of what fear and faith does. But now I want to talk about fear and wisdom. Because many times we'll say, this isn't fear, this is wisdom. Let me just give you a couple thoughts. I'm not going to try to cover the whole subject of wisdom, but let me just give you a couple thoughts. I think with the first delineation between fear and wisdom is that fear has a conditioning of you trying to find a sense of safety, but over the long haul, which we all have a need for safety and finding safety. That's not where it ends. It takes the theme of safety, or maybe we could use the word also certainty, like, okay, where can I land? Or groundedness, stability, those kind of things. It takes the subject of safety and it conditions us to avoid threats all the time. and avoid discomfort. So it kind of creates a bubble boy life where we don't know how to face certain circumstances. Now, where is that for you? Now, some men would say, man, no, I face the obstacles. I move towards them. Maybe you do that at work, but do you know how to do that with your wife and have a conversation about stuff that you keep avoiding without being angry, without going off the handle, right? So there becomes a preservation. We just start to always try to preserve our life. And Jesus said, man, if you're going to try to save your life, you're going to lose it. If you lose your life for my sake, you're going to find it. So part of really moving into wisdom is letting go of how fear influences us in a deceptive way to self-preserve at all things, because God's always working in faith, always. And faith involves risk. It involves stretching. Wisdom, on the other hand, the focus is not safety, because sometimes we think if I'm wise, it will always keep me safe and I won't have to be uncomfortable. That's not true. Wisdom is going to move us to maturity. It's involved in stretching. It's going to move you through growth opportunities, because wisdom is gained a lot through the learning of experience in life. That's why often we look at those who are older, the elderly, or those who've gone before us. They carry a lot of wisdom. Right? Now, they may also carry a lot of fears that were never dealt with, but they carry aspects of wisdom. How did it come about? Through the learning of experience. Now, the Bible says that in Proverbs 9:10, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So that tells us a couple things. If you want to walk in wisdom, you need to gain an absolute overwhelming awe of who God is. That's why learning who he is, experiencing his nature, magnifying who he is, and this is intentional. And I think it's the number one reason why a healthy, meditative, devotional, Bible reading, prayer life, I'm not talking about like ritual of just doing something to do it, where it fills your heart. I think the goal is connection to the awe of who he is, because that, in this world we live in, is what can easily leak. You can lose your awareness of the greatness of God by getting sucked into a man-centered, what we can handle, what we can do kind of world. Wisdom starts with almighty awareness of who you are. Fear of the Lord is not being afraid of God, like a tormenting fear of God. Many people think that's what it is, like just always, because that causes avoidance. This fear, it's not just awe. It's like experiencing an overwhelming sense of greatness. So if God manifested a sliver of his glory to you and you experienced it, you'd be like Moses and go, you're blown away by the greatness of it, right? So that's why God, when we appeared to Elijah, all these different stories you see, they're encounters of who he is. It creates a set point. He's huge and he's over everything else. So he becomes the big thing that overwhelms everything else the enemy can do. So it's the beginning of wisdom. Notice it's the beginning. It's not the end all of wisdom. Some people say, well, this is where you go. No, this is a start. Wisdom has to be developed through your growth journey. You develop wisdom by continuing to be teachable in all things. When you see Solomon's writings, and this is why I say don't be defensive about your fears. This isn't fear, this is wisdom. Well, if you're saying that all the time, you're probably not wise. Okay? Because wise people don't need to proclaim and defend all their thinking. Right? So where does wisdom get developed? We learn to listen. We learn to be teachable. We remain humble. Solomon's writings about wisdom in Proverbs was all about learning from his mother and father. And that's where he began. Fear the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and then everything they taught them. Bring it around your neck. Don't forget their words. So what is it talking about? Teachability, right? But wisdom is learned in the experience. Now, here's something I want to confront that's a fear factor. The Bible says, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, but let him ask and receive it. Don't doubt in your heart, because if you do that, the Bible says in James, you're a double-minded man, unstable in all your ways. So so much of what people deal with, even in mental health, is they have two thoughts that are constantly in operation, right? It's like maybe a right and wrong, or they feel like it's a yin and yang, or whatever people call it in the world, right? But they're always having these opposing thoughts working against each other. They have a double-minded world. What's double-mindedness? Two thoughts that stay, and you're not made to live with two thoughts. You're made to live out of one thought. You are meant to be single-minded. You have one identity, one thought that needs to have your focus right now, and take a step and act on it, right? So one of the reasons we don't have wisdom is because we live in double-mindedness. Double-mindedness is rooted in fear, the fear of what if. God, give me wisdom. I think I need to take this step, but what if that doesn't work out? And what if I need this thing over here? What if it double-minded? And so many times what we need to do to develop wisdom is make a decision and just step into it. And here's the key. Listen to me. I don't care how many people listen to this. If it's one person or 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever, I want you to hear this. Make a decision and learn in the doing versus having to have everything just right and make the decision. We live in a culture where we want everything to be perfect, and then we'll take the step. Excuse me while I sneeze. Let me just grab a tissue. We live in a culture where we want the perfect things to happen, and then we'll make the decision. So it makes us procrastinators. We're afraid of failure, and we're afraid of pain. And what you don't realize is there's great wisdom that can be learned if you're teachable to step out of the boat, walk on the water. Now we look at the story of Peter where he gets out of the boat and he walks on water, and we point to, Peter sank because he didn't keep his eyes on Jesus and he freaked out. Well, what about you? You're still in the boat. So we live as spectators watching, and we can do this on social media. We can critique other people, right? Meanwhile, we're still in the boat. Peter gained great learning by stepping out and then sinking. That experience probably added so much to his later ministry work and who he was and what he manifested. I have gained so much by learning in the doing. I've wasted many years in overthinking. We're overthinking relationship decisions. We're overthinking steps we need to take. Just take one step in front of the other. Wisdom is available, but the wisdom is learned in the doing, in experience. And so many of you want wisdom, but you're stuck at your current level where you're not taking action in faith. Because when you take action in faith, you keep yourself open to wisdom. Just stay single-minded. Here's where I'm This is the best I know right now that I'm going to take a step forward, but I'm going to remain teachable. But here's where I'm taking a step. And I'm going to learn in the doing and not learn in the get everything right, and then I'll take a step. We live in a world of procrastinators, right? Where people are procrastinating. Don't take action. Why? Because they're afraid of failure. Because failure is the enemy. And for many men, I know this, you don't just have a failure, you are a failure. Shame comes in, right? And God's working that in my life where it's like, no, step out and you learn in it. You have now experience of learning versus theory. And we got a lot of people out there that have all these great theories about what you should do. It's amazing to me, the theories that people give, and they've never actually processed it out. They have theories about how to help people, but they never helped someone. They have theories of what could work out there, but they haven't actually done it themselves. Or I'm always hesitant with somebody who everything just works great for them when they say that. And they don't have an honesty of like, I got some areas I'm working on. It's just a thought, because that lack of humility, man, when the humility is there, it's powerful because it postures for vulnerability, postures for people to walk in their own journey. So I want to give you permission in this time in this season to let God work on areas where you just begin to take action. I want to encourage you to get my book, I Will Not Fear, because this is going to be a great tool in where we're at, what we're going through at various levels of where fear has an influence. I have an online course too that you can take part of. You can even ask questions, submit questions, and I can address it in the course. Also have a great book called The Heart Healing Journey, which is a 28-day process on how you can be encouraged and strengthened and what it means to heal, awaken, transform your heart. Many people have been incredibly blessed by my good. God loves me and I love myself. This has helped people in tremendous ways to see themselves through the eyes of love and the way that God sees them. Also, a popular book that has springboarded many into experiencing God's love, also understanding who they are and transforming their relationship patterns by exposing the rejection mindset and getting rejection out. When I saw rejection, I realized that it formed most of my decisions. It formed most of my relationship habits. Now, if you go to my website currently, right now, and this may change at some point. Well, actually, it will change at some point. I have a small hardcover book. It's available in audio too, but you can get it as a free download, Experiencing God's Love as Your Father. This is a very foundational read. And don't we need a revelation of the Father's love now more than ever to understand who he is in love as an Abba, as a dad? I'm going to help you to restructure and set in motion. What does it look like to relate to a good father? What does it look like to relate to him in his love? So anyway, I pray this stream is a blessing to your life, to your journey. And I pray that every work of fear that comes against you would be torn down, and that this would be a season where you would actually rise up in great strength, power, love, and a sound mind, faith, hope, and love. This is your brother, Mark, saying have a wonderful day and be empowered.